Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring a case that really pushes the boundaries of faith and understanding, I think. The Tanacu Exorcism from 2005.
Okay.
It's a story that unfolded in post-communist Romania.
Right?
A time marked by a resurgence of religious belief, particularly within monastic life. So imagine this. A young nun, Maricica Irina Cornici, begins exhibiting what some perceive as disturbing behavior within the confines of the Tanacu Monastery.
Yeah, it's crucial to remember that this was a period when Romania was grappling with the shadows of its past, seeking solace and meaning in the wake of decades of enforced atheism. The resurgence of faith was particularly patent in rural communities like Tanacu, where traditional beliefs often held sway.
Yeah, that context really sets the stage for what happened. This nun, Cornici, was just 23 years old, and it was the monastery's priest, Father Daniel Corogeanu, a somewhat unconventional figure who became convinced she was possessed by Satan.
Yeah, and it's this conviction, this unwavering belief in demonic possession that set in motion a chain of events that ultimately ended in Cornici's death.
It sounds like a scene straight out of a horror film. A young nun, a remote monastery, a priest convinced of demonic forces. It's both fascinating and deeply unsettling.
What's particularly intriguing is how this case forces us to confront the intersection of faith, mental health, and the human struggle to make sense of the unknown. Were Cornici's actions truly the result of demonic possession, as Father Corogeanu believed, or was something else at play?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to get closer to an answer, we need to understand Maricica's life before she entered the monastery. It's a story marked by tragedy, a broken family, her father's suicide, and a childhood spent in an orphanage. It makes you wonder how those early experiences might have shaped her worldview, her vulnerability.
The impact of early trauma on an individual's psychological development is well documented. It's not about excusing actions, but rather understanding the complexities of the human experience, the factors that might lead someone to seek solace and belonging in a religious community.
It's interesting that you bring up seeking solace because for a while it seemed like Cornici did find some stability. She worked as a nanny in Germany and then later in Banat before ultimately deciding to join the monastery. But even before entering monastic life, there were conflicting accounts of her mental state.
Yeah, this is where the waters get murky.
Yeah.
Some reports indicate that doctors had diagnosed her with schizophrenia, but she was nonetheless released to the monastery's care. This raises a number of questions about the adequacy of the mental health care system at that time, and the perhaps misplaced trust in the monastery's ability to address such a complex condition.
And to make things even more complicated, some of her friends from that time claim she never exhibited signs of mental illness. Then you have her brother, who was absolutely insistent that she was possessed. He even claimed to have witnessed Satan entering her.
These conflicting accounts underscore the challenge of interpreting behavior through different lenses of understanding. Was it mental illness, as some believed, or was it, as her brother so vehemently insisted, demonic influence?
You mentioned the influence of traditional beliefs earlier, and I think that's really important to consider here. In a place like rural Romania, where faith and folklore are deeply intertwined, the line between mental illness and spiritual affliction can become blurred.
Absolutely. Beliefs about demonic possession have deep roots in many cultures, shaping perceptions of illness and influencing approaches to healing. It's a reminder that context is everything, particularly when grappling with issues that straddle the boundaries of the spiritual and the psychological.
So we have this young woman, Maricica, who's experienced significant trauma and might be struggling with undiagnosed mental illness. And she enters this monastery led by Father Corogeanu, who has a reputation for being a bit unorthodox. Tell me more about this priest. What was he like?
Well, his background was anything but typical for a priest. He had a past life as a football player, even abandoning his university studies to devote himself to monastic life. There were also reports of clashes with the diocese, with Corogeanu viewing many church rules as outdated and unduly influenced by external forces.
It sounds like he had a rebellious streak, a willingness to challenge authority and forge his own path.
Yes, and that independent spirit seems to have extended to his approach to faith and spiritual matters. He ultimately decided to dissolve the original community of monks at Tanacu and formed a community of nuns who were deeply devoted to him.
It's almost like he was creating his own domain, his own interpretation of faith within the walls of that monastery. And it was within that environment, with Corogeanu at the helm, that Maricica's perceived possession unfolded.
It's crucial to consider the power dynamics at play here. Corogeanu held a position of spiritual authority within the monastery, and the nuns, by all accounts, were deeply devoted to him and his teachings. This creates a complex environment where beliefs and interpretations could easily become magnified,
Right.
particularly in the absence of external perspectives or challenges to Corogeanu's authority.
Okay, so we've got the troubled young nun, the unconventional priests, and the isolated monastery. It seems like all the pieces were in place for something dramatic to unfold. And that's exactly what happened with the exorcism, which ultimately led to Maricica's death. Let's talk about that.
So before we delve into the events of the exorcism itself, it's important to understand that Father Corogeanu completely rejected any medical explanation for Maricica's behavior. He was unshakably convinced that she was possessed, and that conviction shaped his response, his actions.
So what did this exorcism look like? What actually happened within the walls of that monastery?
Well, based on accounts from the nuns involved, they restrained Maricica, chaining her to a cross, anointing her with holy oil, and placing a towel in her mouth to stifle her cries.
It's hard to even imagine that scene. A young woman, restrained and subjected to such intense rituals, it sends chills down my spine. How long did this go on?
They kept her like that in the church, praying constantly for 3 days. 3 days of intense rituals, prayers, and attempts to expel what they believed was a demonic force residing within her.
It's hard to fathom the level of belief, the desperation that must have driven those actions. And it raises so many questions about the potential for harm when faith, especially in such an isolated environment, goes unchecked.
What's particularly chilling is that the nuns later defended their actions, claiming they genuinely believed Maricica was a danger to herself and others, that they were trying to help her. Sister Corogeanu, one of the nuns involved, is quoted as saying, "Irina knew she was possessed by evil spirits because she was begging us to tie her up and help her." It's a statement that offers a glimpse into their worldview, the depth of their belief, and the potential for self-deception when those beliefs are reinforced within a closed system.
It makes you wonder if, in their minds, they were truly trying to help, convinced they were battling a malevolent force. Or was there an element of control, of exerting authority over someone deemed disruptive or different?
That's a question worth exploring further. Power dynamics within religious communities, particularly those with charismatic leaders and isolated environments, can create fertile ground for abuses of authority.
Right.
Even when those actions are framed as acts of faith or spiritual intervention.
It's all so complex, so disturbing, and we haven't even gotten to Maricica's death yet.
Yes, the tragic culmination of this story is still to come, and it raises even more questions about the boundaries of faith, the limits of human understanding, and the devastating consequences that can unfold when belief systems clash with reality.
So we left off with Maricica restrained in the church for 3 days as part of this intense exorcism. Sadly, this is where the story takes an even darker turn, because after those 3 days, she died. Can you walk me through what happened in those final moments and the immediate aftermath of her death?
After 3 days of being restrained and subjected to the exorcism ritual, the nuns untied Maricica, and they gave her some food. Shortly after that, she fainted. When they couldn't wake her and noticed a weak pulse, they called an ambulance.
So it sounds like they did try to get medical help, but tragically it was too late.
Yeah, by the time the ambulance arrived, she was already dead. The official autopsy concluded that she died from dehydration, exhaustion, and a lack of oxygen. However, it's important to note that the autopsy also revealed she had been suffering from a pre-existing medical condition, pellagra, which likely contributed to her weakened state. Pellagra is a disease caused by a deficiency of niacin, or vitamin B3, and can lead to a variety of symptoms, including fatigue, weakness, and mental confusion.
That detail about the pellagra adds another layer of complexity to this case. It makes you wonder if her physical condition played a role in her perceived possession. Could her symptoms have been misinterpreted or exacerbated by the lack of proper nutrition and medical care?
It's certainly a possibility worth considering. The symptoms of pellagra, particularly the mental and emotional disturbances, could easily be misconstrued, especially within a community where beliefs about demonic possession were prevalent.
It's a tragic reminder that sometimes what we perceive as spiritual or supernatural occurrences might have a very real, very physical basis.
Precisely. And this case underscores the importance of considering all possible explanations, particularly when dealing with matters of health and well-being.
So Maricica died, and the official cause was determined to be dehydration, exhaustion, and lack of oxygen, potentially aggravated by her pre-existing pellagra. What happened next?
Well, as you might expect, there were consequences. Father Corogeanu and the 4 nuns who participated in the exorcism were arrested and charged with murder and deprivation of liberty.
It's difficult to believe that something like this could happen in the 21st century. A young woman dies during an exorcism, and the priest and nuns involved face murder charges.
It highlights the tension that can arise when deeply held beliefs, especially within a religious context, clash with legal and medical frameworks. In the eyes of the law, their actions, regardless of their intentions, resulted in Cornici's death.
What was the outcome of the trial?
The trial, as you can imagine, became a media sensation in Romania, sparking heated debates about faith, mental health, and the boundaries of religious freedom. The prosecution sought a life sentence for Father Corogeanu, arguing that his actions were reckless and directly led to Cornici's death.
Given the intensity of the case and the public attention surrounding it, I'm not surprised that sparked such controversy.
The courtroom was packed with both Corogeanu's supporters and those who condemned his actions. Some saw him as a misguided zealot, while others viewed him as a man of faith who was simply trying to help a troubled soul. Ultimately, the court sentenced him to 14 years in prison.
Wow, 14 years is a significant sentence. What about the nuns?
They received sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years. However, the legal saga didn't end there. The case went through the appeals process, and the Court of Appeals later reduced Corogeanu's sentence to 7 years. He ended up being released on parole in 2011 after serving 2/3 of his sentence.
So even within the legal system, there seems to have been some debate about the appropriate punishment for his actions. It's clear that this case touched a nerve within Romanian society, raising fundamental questions about the role of faith and the limits of religious practice.
Absolutely, and it's important to note that the Romanian Orthodox Church itself took action after Cornici's death. They closed down the Tanacu Monastery, which for all intents and purposes had become Corogeanu's domain, and they defrocked him, stripping him of his priestly status.
For those unfamiliar with the term, defrocking means officially removing a priest from the clergy, essentially revoking their right to perform priestly duties.
Right, it was a symbolic act demonstrating that the church was distancing itself from Corogeanu's actions and reaffirming its commitment to official doctrine and practices, which clearly do not condone what happened to Maricica.
So both the legal system and the church responded in significant ways. But what about the public? Did opinions shift in the wake of Cornici's death and the subsequent trial?
Public opinion in Tanacu and indeed throughout Romania remained sharply divided. Many residents of Tanacu, including Cornici's own brother, continued to believe that she was possessed and that Corogeanu was genuinely trying to help her. They saw him as a victim of circumstance, a devout man punished for his unwavering faith.
It's an estimate to the enduring power of belief, how it shapes our understanding of events and influences our judgments, even in the face of seemingly contradictory evidence.
Veronica Tomalescu, a resident of Tanacu, defended Corogeanu and the nuns, stating, "They didn't do anything wrong. The priest was only trying to help that girl, to drive the devil out of her. It's not their fault she died." This sentiment reflects the deeply held beliefs within that community and the way those beliefs color perceptions of right and wrong.
We've spoken about the official autopsy report and the coroner's conclusion that Maricica died from dehydration, exhaustion, and lack of oxygen, possibly aggravated by her pre-existing pellagra. But is there any evidence to support the belief that demonic possession played a role in her death, as Father Corogeanu and his supporters maintained?
There's no scientific evidence to support the claim of demonic possession. The autopsy clearly identified the physical causes of death, and those findings were upheld by the medical community. However, this case highlights the limitations of scientific inquiry when it comes to matters of faith and belief. For those who believe in spiritual forces, scientific explanations might not be persuasive or satisfactory.
It's a fascinating intersection of science and faith, reason and belief. And it seems that in this particular case, those two perspectives were simply irreconcilable.
It's worth noting that years later, in 2014, the coroner who had been involved in the exhumation of Cornici's body made a rather startling statement. He claimed that she actually died from an adrenaline overdose administered by the paramedics who were trying to revive her in the ambulance.
Wait, are you saying the exorcism itself might not have directly caused her death? That the medical intervention intended to save her life might have inadvertently led to her demise?
That's precisely what the coroner suggested. He even expressed bewilderment that the judges hadn't considered this information during the trial. This claim, if true, adds yet another layer of tragedy to this already complex and heartbreaking story. It raises questions about the potential for medical negligence, the unintended consequences of well-intentioned actions, and the difficulty of untangling cause and effect in a case where so many factors were at play.
It also challenges the narrative that's been widely accepted that Maricica died as a direct result of the exorcism ritual. If the coroner's statement is accurate, then her death was potentially avoidable, a result of a medical error rather than spiritual forces.
Father Corogeanu himself seized upon this new information, stating that his biggest mistake was calling the ambulance. He believes that if he hadn't sought medical help, Maricica would still be alive. This, of course, is pure speculation, but it reflects his deep-seated conviction that spiritual healing, not medical intervention, was the appropriate course of action.
It's important to remember that we're dealing with conflicting narratives, interpretations of event filtered through the lens of belief and personal biases, and ultimately, we may never know for certain what truly transpired in those final moments of Maricica's life.
It's a reminder that truth can be elusive, especially in cases where faith, mental health, and potential medical negligence intertwine.
We've discussed the legal and religious ramifications of Cornici's death, but this case transcended those realms and captured the public imagination. It's a story that has resonated far beyond the borders of Romania.
The Tanacu exorcism has had a lasting cultural impact. It has served as inspiration for two films, Beyond the Hills, directed by Cristian Mungu and released in 2012, and The Crucifixion, which came out in 2017. Both films explore the events surrounding Cornici's death, albeit through different lenses and with varying degrees of artistic license.
These films, along with numerous articles, books, and documentaries that have been produced over the years, attest to the enduring fascination with this case.
The story of Maricica Cornici and Father Corogeanu continues to compel and disturb, prompting us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of belief, the limits of human understanding, and the potential for both good and evil that resides within us all.
As we wrap up our deep dive into the Tanacu exorcism, I'm struck by the number of unanswered questions that remain. What are your final thoughts on this case, and what message do you hope our listener takes away from this exploration?
The Tanacu exorcism stands as a stark reminder that the line between faith, mental illness, and the potential for harm can be incredibly blurry. It's a story that defies easy answers or simple explanations, and it's one that continues to challenge our understanding of the world and our place within it.
It's a story that compels us to grapple with the complexities of human nature, the enduring power of belief, and the potential for tragedy when those beliefs are taken to extremes.
It's a case that invites us to ask ourselves some tough questions. What are the limits of belief, particularly when those beliefs have the potential to impact the well-being of others? Where do we draw the line between religious freedom and the responsibility to protect those who might be vulnerable or exploited? And how do we navigate the complex intersection of faith, mental health, and the legal systems that are designed to safeguard individual rights?
It's a lot to unpack. We've talked about the specific details of this case, but it feels like there are some universal lessons here, things that go beyond the confines of a Romanian monastery.
Absolutely. One of the key takeaways, for me at least, is the importance of critical thinking. It's about questioning assumptions, seeking multiple perspectives, and recognizing that even our most deeply held beliefs can be flawed or incomplete. We need to be willing to challenge those beliefs, to engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views, and to acknowledge that sometimes there are no easy answers.
And what about the role of empathy? It seems like a crucial element when trying to understand cases like this, particularly when dealing with the complexities of mental health and the potential for misinterpretations of behavior.
Empathy is essential. It's about trying to understand the world through the eyes of others, even when their actions might seem incomprehensible, or even reprehensible. It's about recognizing the humanity of everyone involved, acknowledging their struggles, and seeking to understand the factors that might have contributed to their choices.
This case really highlights the danger of jumping to conclusions, of assuming we know the whole story based on limited information or preconceived notions. It's a reminder to approach complex situations with humility, recognizing the limits of our own understanding and the need for compassion.
And I think it's also important to acknowledge the role of authority, both religious and medical. Those in positions of power have a responsibility to exercise that power ethically, with compassion, and a genuine concern for the well-being of those entrusted to their care. This case raises questions about the potential for abuses of authority within closed systems, the need for accountability, and the importance of ensuring that vulnerable individuals have access to support and resources outside of those systems.
So much to think about. As we wrap up this deep dive into the Tanacu exorcism, I'm left with a sense of unease, but also a profound appreciation for the complexity of human experience.
Me too. It's a case that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the power of belief, and about the potential for both darkness and light that exist within us all. It's a story that stays with you long after the details fade, a reminder that the search for understanding is an ongoing journey, one that requires both curiosity and compassion.
Well said. This has been a fascinating, albeit unsettling exploration. Thank you for guiding us through this complex and thought-provoking case.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listener, I hope this deep dive has encouraged you to think critically, to question assumptions, and to engage in thoughtful conversations about the issues that matter most, even when those conversations are difficult or uncomfortable. It's a case that invites us to ask ourselves some tough questions. What are the limits of belief, particularly when those beliefs have the potential to impact the well-being of others? Where do we draw the line between religious freedom and the responsibility to protect those who might be vulnerable or exploited? And how do we navigate the complex intersection of faith, mental health, and the legal systems that are designed to safeguard individual rights?
It's a lot to unpack, for sure. I've talked about the specific details of this case, but it feels like there are some universal lessons here, things that go beyond the confines of a Romanian monastery.
Absolutely. One of the key takeaways, for me at least, is the importance of critical thinking. It's about questioning assumptions, seeking multiple perspective, and recognizing that even our most deeply held beliefs can be flawed or incomplete. We need to be willing to challenge those beliefs, to engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views, and to acknowledge that sometimes there are no easy answers.
Yeah. And what about the role of empathy? It seems like a crucial element when trying to understand cases like this, particularly when dealing with the complexities of mental health and the potential for misinterpretations of behavior.
Empathy is essential. It's about trying to understand the world through the eyes of others, even when their actions might seem incomprehensible or even reprehensible. It's about recognizing the humanity of everyone involved, acknowledging their struggles, and seeking to understand the factors that might have contributed to their choices.
It's true. This case really highlights the danger of jumping to conclusions, of assuming we know the whole story based on limited information or preconceived notions. It's a reminder to approach complex situations with humility, recognizing the limits of our own understanding and the need for compassion.
And I think it's also important to acknowledge the role of authority, both religious and medical. Those in positions of power have a responsibility to exercise that power ethically, with compassion and a genuine concern for the well-being of those entrusted to their care. This case raises questions about the potential for abuses of authority within closed systems, the need for accountability, and the importance of ensuring that vulnerable individuals have access to support and resources outside of those systems.
So much to think about. As we wrap up this deep dive into the Tanacu exorcism, I'm left with a sense of unease, but also a profound appreciation for the complexity of human experience.
Yeah, me too. It's a case that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the power of belief, and about the potential for both darkness and light that exists within us all. It's a story that stays with you long after the details fade, a reminder that the search for understanding is an ongoing journey, one that requires both curiosity and compassion.
Well said. This has been a fascinating, albeit unsettling, exploration. Thank you for guiding us through this complex and thought-provoking case.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listener, I hope this deep dive has encouraged you to think critically, to question assumptions, and to engage in thoughtful conversations about the issues that matter most, even when those conversations are difficult or uncomfortable.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.